So this video expands upon my previous theory about how Lugia and Ho-Oh could be the main legendary Pokemon of Sun and Moon version. It also kind of branches into my Pokemon Sun and Moon location theory as well, kind of like how Kalos is based off of France but doesn't take place in France. It's kind of the same with Hawaii, that it's some kind of Hawaiian influences with these games, and that could maybe mean something. So the thing is, these need to hold up. These theories don't have to be absolutely true, but you have to watch the videos, you have to understand what these theories represent to come up with this idea that Pokemon Sun and Moon will take place in the Orange Islands. Now, if you think this is a cool idea, please leave a thumbs up. Also, comment your thoughts after seeing this video about what you think this could all mean when we bring it all together. So first off, Pokemon Sun and Moon and the Orange Islands, how does it relate? Well, when we look at the Pokemon Sun and Moon reveal trailer, we actually get a good amount of information. One of the main things about the Hawaii theory are the yellow fire trucks that we see with the Blastoise riding. Those are fire trucks. That's going to be a really cool idea on how to take part of it, but that is what we find in Hawaii. Same with the palm trees. And we also get a picture of some kind of aquarium, gym, resort looking place. And it's very tropical. We see palm trees there. So this is going to be in some kind of island or at least a very warm tropical area, which is where we start getting our gears going, because what's the first thing that you see in the Orange Islands in the anime? It's a palm tree. That once we actually get into it, you know, after the whole blimp disaster and whatnot, once we land on Valencia Island, one of the first things that we see is going to be that palm tree. And it also does make a lot of sense with Valencia Island, because that's where we even have a Pokemon professor. Professor Ivy's there, so we already have a bit of the main series game influence. It's like half the game right there. We have a place to start, we got the lab, we got the professor, what else do we have? Well, we also know that the Orange Islands are right underneath Kanto. So we're going to the south, we're getting in those more tropical, warmer climate areas, but even when you look at it, parts of Kanto are in the Orange Islands, Cinnabar Islands, Seafoam Islands. These are technically Orange Islands. Now, I will admit that the Orange Islands are a bit awkward when you put it to scale. Like, I have to shrink it down a lot, which doesn't really look good on screen. But anyway, I tried to kind of scale it around and make it fit with the Kanto Johto map. As you can see, it roughly matches the outline. It actually matches even better if we take older artwork, so if we have the newer stuff, you know, you kind of have to fit it, but we can see the Whirl Islands, we can see that there is some form of scale going in, and then when we zoom out even more, it starts to go back to the Lugia Ho-Oh theory, because I was talking about, well, they're legendary Pokemon. You know, Lugia, it controls the sea, it goes wherever it wants, so having Lugia in a different region can work. That just because we have Lugia and Ho-Oh as the main series legendaries, it doesn't make it that it's going to take place in Johto again. It can be a different region. So new region, new Pokemon, it's only the same legendaries, and they might get a Mega or some kind of new feature that plays well with Pokemon Sun and Moon. So we can actually look at it right here. Boom, there's Shamudi Island. There's where all the Lugia shenanigans were taking place for the Pokemon movie. And if we look at the Whirl Islands, where we also found a Lugia in the anime, they're not really too far off, and it kind of explains the baby Lugia as well, because, hey, those two could hook up because they're not really too far away from each other. I mean, they can fly or they can take undersea currents. It's not a lot of distance to travel when you actually look at it, so we can keep everything kind of close to home right there, and it explains the baby Lugia, explains multiple Lugias. Maybe the Lugia from Pokemon 2000 is going to be the legendary for Pokemon Sun and Moon as long as it takes place in the Orange Islands. So as you can see, all these theories kind of rely on each other, but it does make sense. Same with Ho-Oh. If we look at Ho-Oh, it was originally spotted in Pallet Town, which is just north of Cinnabar Island, which is an Orange Island, as we already explained. Like when we see the first episode of the anime, Ho-Oh's kind of traveling towards Johto, but it is coming somewhat from the Orange Island. So we know that Ho-Oh, it flies around, it likes to travel, so it can also find home, like the main Ho-Oh that we are familiar with. It can also find home in the Orange Islands, which does make a decent case for Ho-Oh and Lugia being the main legendaries in Pokemon Sun and Moon, if it takes place in the Orange Islands. And another reason why I think the Orange Islands could be a good idea is, remember the part from the trailer?
It all comes together in an all-new Pokemon adventure.
That's actually a philosophy that Game Freak has been holding on to in the 6th generation when you think about it. We have the Kanto starters in Kalos. There's actually been a lot of interviews with the game developers like, hey, is there a reason why you did this? That's because they want that nostalgia back in there. They want to kind of appeal to the older fans as well as just kind of go back to the roots, you know? You just can't kind of cover up what Pokemon was. They like to celebrate it. Game Freak, the game designers, they love celebrating where Pokemon came from, which is why we're seeing the remakes, you know, not even just Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire. We saw Fire Red, Leaf Green, Heart Gold, Soul Silver. We're seeing all these callbacks, and Game Freak loves doing that, so it still makes it possible that this whole "it all comes together" could just be talking about just kind of not really ending it, because you're not wrapping it all up, but you're kind of setting where you want the Pokemon world to be, which kind of brings us to the next part, the Pokemon world. Do we need to expand the Pokemon world? Another region just makes it very complicated, because we don't know where Kalos is in the world, we don't know where Unova is, and compared to like Sinnoh and Hoenn and all the other regions, it's scattered all over the place. Like, the world, while it is a large place, you can fit many different regions and many different countries and state ideas and stuff into the world. You could also kind of keep it in a nice enclosed area, at least if you start putting things together, you don't have to make it more complicated than it needs to be. So having an existing area become a part of the main game, that's not a bad idea at all. And that's another thing that the game developers have talked about in other interviews as well, that they don't want the game to become way too complex, that they feel it is getting that way, so having just it get a little simpler over time is another way to just kind of keep the franchise fresh and feeling great. And when we think about it, legendary Pokemon, having Lugia and Ho-Oh as the main series legendaries, that's a little kind of realistic when we see all the other crazy legendary Pokemon that have been introduced. What other legendary concepts are there? Might as well just kind of keep it simplified. And then we get back to this interview with Masuda. So right here he says that there's always a theme when going into a new game. Now what if that is one of the themes for Pokemon Sun and Moon? Just kind of, it all comes together, keeping Pokemon all nice and clean at this point, simplifying it in its own way, while also still celebrating a lot of things about Pokemon. We actually see this in the Pokemon Direct that reveals Pokemon Sun and Moon as well, because of the Pokemon Bank. That with the first generation Virtual Console releases, we're able to bring those generations into our new game. It all comes together, even with these other games, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow being re-released. Well, now we can put that into our Pokemon Sun and Moon. We can kind of bring all of this together from the classic games, and I think that that's actually a really good concept. That I feel that keeping Pokemon in its more classic state instead of making it complex, expanding it too much, that could be really bad for Pokemon, but with the way that this is going, I really like the idea, which does make the Orange Island seem fairly plausible. Now, unfortunately, I feel I need to make this last part of the video, because I know that there's going to be comments saying, "Oh, well, you're an idiot, because the Orange Islands is a terrible idea. No one wants to surf through all that. It's not going to work for a region." Here's the thing, there's this magical invention called a boat, and even a ferry, that what we can do is we can travel by boat and ferry and not have to surf through all of these islands, and you're not going to get any kind of gameplay change whatsoever. You know why? If we look at the anime, the Orange Islands, some of these islands are massive. They have multiple cities. They have large cities. They have a lot of different areas. You can travel several routes on an island and then ferry to the next island, and then you can do a couple more routes there, maybe a gym, maybe multiple towns. So it's not going to feel like you're surfing through an endless sea. It's not going to feel like a very empty region just covered in water. You can actually make it feel like a very large, almost land mass of regions if you just play it out really well. And that doesn't make this idea impossible. That actually gives us a lot of cool options as well, because you go to like one main island, you can ferry to a smaller island, and then you have to surf to another island to ferry through a larger island. So you can actually keep a lot of the surfing mechanics as well, but you can still play on the larger land masses and whatnot. Now, this does leave a lot of empty space on the map, but if you think about Hoenn, there was a lot of empty space in Hoenn that if you soar, a lot of those were actually the mirage spots, but it didn't make it feel like there was wasted space on the map. And it's also another really good way of introducing soaring, that we can have soaring in the Orange Islands, and that would be really fun. Like, you could actually get a really beautiful understanding. Like, when I was soaring for the first time in Hoenn, it made you feel like you were just kind of flying over a really beautiful island, and we could do that for the whole Orange Islands archipelago. And again, Hawaii is an archipelago, so there's those relations as well. I mean, I feel like it could work. So you can go to some areas exclusively. Maybe they'll introduce something else like a mirage spot, where you can go to these other land masses to catch generation exclusive Pokemon and whatnot. I think it all could work out really well, that, you can fly as well. Like, once you've actually discovered a city, you can fly back there anytime. So having too much water isn't a bad thing once you actually get through the gameplay. As long as the gameplay doesn't make it feel like too much water, it doesn't matter if you're playing on a ton of islands, because you're not going to feel it if the gameplay is done well. And I think the last point that I need to address is that with new generation Pokemon. Well, we already know that this is first generation stuff. Orange Islands, that's very related to Kanto, and how are we going to get like 5th and 6th and 7th generation Pokemon in these areas if they've already been explored and discovered? Game Freak finds a way. Like, they've already done this with all the other games. How come in the first generation of Pokemon, we didn't see any second generation Pokemon, even though though Johto was right next door? You know, there's things like that. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, they kind of fixed this with the climate change, that once you got through the story, well, there was a bit of an imbalance, and now you get all these other Pokemon from other regions enjoying the new climate of Hoenn, and it's just one of those things, like, you can eventually just kind of say, oh, by the way, there's Pokemon here now. Game Freak has done in the past, so it doesn't make this an impossible idea. So the last two things I've been saying, it's like, no, this is not impossible by any stretch. It's not a bad idea because of that. If you actually use logic and you think this one through, you know, there's a lot of reasonable things going on as to why this is a thing, and if we go back to the Ho-Oh and Lugia theory, it all seems possible. Honestly, this could be a really good idea, that instead of complicating the game, instead of complicating the legendaries, complicating all these features and mechanics and locations and stuff, we actually know where places will be, and we can keep it simple and still have one of the best Pokemon experiences possible, which goes in line from what we've seen with the Pokemon Sun and Moon teaser. So if you guys enjoyed this theory, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.